Barrington. It's August 8th, 2012, and I'm interviewing Michael Moye on behalf of the Archive of American Television in North Hollywood, California. So we'd like to take a few minutes and start with some early background information. What was your name at birth?
I don't know, and I'll tell you why I don't know. He said, "Oh, here we go." But I was the adopted son of George and Bertha Moye. I never knew my birth mother, never met her, and whatever my real name was, I wasn't privy to that information. My name is Michael George Moye, the name I go by, my given name.
And you were given that name by George and Bertha?
Yes.
Okay, and when were you born and where?
August 11th, 1954, New Haven, Connecticut.
And where did you grow up?
New Haven, Connecticut, yeah. I grew up in a part of New Haven, Connecticut known as New Hallville. Hi, New Hallville. And, went to elementary school there, Actually, I was there for most of my early years, yeah.
What did your father do?
He drove a truck for Winchester's. Almost everybody that lived in New Hallville worked at Winchester's. And when I came along, that part of town was just in transition, part of town was heavily Italian. A lot of blacks were moving in, and a lot of transition going on in my very, very early years. It was a cool little place, though, very blue collar, very what you would think it is.
What did your mother do?
She was a part-time hairdresser, stay at home.
What traits do you think you learned from your parents growing up?
From my father, I learned patience. I also learned the love of travel. He drove a truck. He was constantly on the move. I kind of dug that. I liked the very few times, and I barely remember it might have been some of my first cognizant memories were being in the truck. And enjoying being out on the road. Now, at that time, I didn't know he was carrying just tons of ammunition and gunpowder. But other than that, it was very cool to be in the truck and on the road.
Was there humor in your household?
When my father was angry, he was very funny. Very Red Foxian when he was angry. These oaths would come out of his mouth, and he would just say things that you look back on and say, well, that doesn't make any sense at all, but they were very funny. The things that he was going to do if I didn't shut up, were very, very funny. But that was later on in life. Once he retired from Winchester's, he ran a restaurant, and that's where a lot of humor came from, at least what I saw. That's a lot of humor and character, which is my favorite type of humor, watching different characters, the people that would come in and out of the restaurant. That was just a library for me.
So did you pull from that and from your dad's humor when he was angry when you were writing?
Yes. Oh, yes. And I based a lot of characters on the characters I had known. Again, many of the characters that were on a lot of the earlier shows that I did, the Lear shows, when I do them, they would be almost straight from a lot of the people that I grew up with, the older people. I grew up with. Most of them during this time came from the South. There was a huge migration in the late 50s, early 60s from people from North Carolina, that's where my father was from, South Carolina, that came up to work. And that's a lot of the people that were, in the restaurant my father knew. all that. That's where they came from, and they brought those characters with them, and that's what I would draw from.
Do you think those people would recognize themselves in your characters on TV?
A few. I mean, I would think that a few actually saw themselves, not just from me, but from shows like Good Times, from shows like Sanford and Son, particularly Sanford and Son. There were a lot of characters that Red created, or that they created, that were very similar to the people that I grew up with. I identified with them immediately.
That's great. Did you have any siblings growing up?
Not growing up. Later on, when I was about 11, my parents adopted, another boy. But, the age difference, I can't say that we grew up together.
And what were your interests as a kid?
As a young kid, I was a big comic book fan. Being an only child, I was heavily into escapism, and then I escaped through comic books. Like superheroes, and actually that started my love of writing. I couldn't. Unlike now, then it took a month for the next issue to come out, and you'd read it in 8 minutes and sit there for another 29 days, 30 days. So what I would do when I finished comic books, I would kind of write my own. I got into writing my own stories.
What kind of stories did you write?
Comic books. I did comic books. I great memories of a friend of mine in the 3rd grade who was a very, very good artist. We came up with our own comic book, and while the teacher was droning on and on about Columbus and stuff, we'd be in the back room doing our comic books, and then they would take them and we would do some more. We probably turned out 2 or 3 issues a week, back there. So, but I enjoyed comic books. I liked sports. I liked baseball. Obviously, I liked writing even then, from the 3rd grade on.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, it depended upon what day it was, really. I wanted to be everything from literally a fireman to a farmer, a truck driver like my dad. There wasn't a great deal of options, at least I thought, that were open to me, at that time. So, I tried to keep things in my mind realistically. I'm not one of these, I want to be president. Okay, come on. So I try to keep things realistic, I guess. So, trucker was pretty good.
Did you watch a lot of TV as a kid?
I did.
What shows did you like?
I did. I liked all of them. I liked a lot of comedies. I was a big, this was a little older, but I was a big silly comedies fan. My first great comedy love was The Honeymooners. As I got older, I loved silly comedies, everything from the Beverly Hillbillies to Gilligan's Island. One of my favorite sitcoms, and I still think is the most underrated sitcom ever, was a comedy called Green Acres. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but that was like one of the greatest sitcoms of all time to me. So you can make up your mind about me right now. It is on record. But I did love comedies. I love The Addams Family. I love The Munsters. I wasn't very big on what then were domestic sitcoms, not Brady Bunches or Leave It to Beavers or Dad's Home and those kind. But I kind of like the out there sitcoms. As I got older, I got very intrigued with sci-fi. You know, I was a huge Twilight Zone fan. A huge Outer Limits fan. Either of those shows, no matter what I was doing outside, no matter what, I'm coming indoors to watch the Outer Limits and the Twilight Zone. Dramas, then, action dramas, everything from Streets of San Francisco to Mission Impossible, another show that I would come indoors. So obviously I was indoors a lot. I liked the action dramas and things like that.
And where did you go to college?
That was in North Carolina. I actually went to a community college when my parents moved back to North Carolina after my father had retired and gotten out of the restaurant business. I went down and went to a community college there, and believe it or not, that's how I transitioned. That's where I came from, straight to here, through the American College Theater Festival.
Right. What did you study at college?
I then was interested in marine biology. I did a little stint with journalism, and then when I realized, well, soon there's not going to be any more journalism, and I was right, I went marine biology. And I was always fascinated with the sea and the critters, and so by all rights now I should have been in Florida telling young kids stop tapping on the glass, but then television, sort of stepped in and detoured that for a little while.
So tell us about that. What were the circumstances of you moving to Los Angeles? Tell us about the American College Theater Festival.
Well, when I moved to North Carolina, and looking for basically something to do, I wound up at, the community college there, and soon wound up hanging around the theater department a lot. And in addition to, the typical things theater departments do, put on little plays and for the school, what they did was they kind of formed a little acting troupe and went around to different elementary schools in the county and performed plays for, little children. And I kind of, I thought that was cool. But, this was an elementary school, and, as such, the budget wasn't, well, it didn't exist, actually. And so they had to pull back on, their performances. And one day I said, I can kind of help with that. So I started writing little original plays that we all performed and went around to the schools. And I enjoyed that. I mean, I did a little bit of acting. I didn't necessarily enjoy that as much as I enjoyed writing the plays themselves and, watching them be performed. And I decided it would be, let me try my hand at a, grown-up big boy, comedy. And while I was writing that, a flyer appeared on the door about the American College Theater Festival. It had a lot of branches in adaptations and originals and drama and whatever. But there was a comedy playwriting award, and it was sponsored by Norman Lear. And, a bunch of the guys said, well, why don't you enter that? You're doing something, why don't you enter that? No, I'm like, it's $50. I can't, I'm not going to do that. I said, come on, enter it. What? Outside of $50, what are you going to lose? So I entered, and it really went from there. We actually, to my surprise, and I'm not being modest, to my actual surprise, we won regionals. And what was very cool about this was that this was a community college, and we, as such, we went up against a lot of big boy colleges. And we won the regionals, and we won the state one, and we actually got to the nationals, and we had performed down at Wake Forest, and I mean, it was very, very cool. And we wound up winning the American College Theater Festival Comedy Playwriting Awards. The play did, and as the winner, I got to come out and come out to Los Angeles. That was my very first time in Los Angeles, actually being on an airplane. That I remember very well. And I got to watch television show being produced, and I got to write a spec script for any one of Norman's shows, and I had chosen Good Times because that, at the time, was the show that I was the most familiar with. And I think I was out about a week or 10 days, just watching a week's worth of production, obviously getting to meet Norman, getting to meet the actors in the show, and getting on the set and all of that. And after that, I went back home, submitted my spec script, went back home. I was just about finished my stint at the community college there, so I was actually seriously considering going into the Navy after that. But I got a phone call. I graduated in the end of the summer, I think. And in November, I believe it was, I got a phone call from Norman's group asking me if I wanted to come back and work on Good Times full time. And here we go.
Wow. Do you remember what the play was about that you wrote for the contest?
Yes, it was called Tilt, and it was a send-up of the bureaucracy. I think that's why Norman liked it, because it had just a little bit of a political element, about the frustrations of an old man who, through a mix-up, started getting Social Security checks in the mail every day instead of like every week. And he did the wrong thing, which was be honest about it and report it, thinking that they were going to address it immediately and life would be back to normal. But of course, it didn't, because again, the machine, hence Tilt, the broken machine, the checks kept coming, now sometimes 3 and 4 a day, and he literally wound up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in Social Security checks, and was starving to death because if he spent a penny, he would go to jail for the rest of his life, and they told him. And it was about, just, trying to live and negotiate your living room around millions of dollars while you were dying, literally. And I think because of the element there, that's why Norman liked it.
Right. What was the first script, the spec script that you wrote for Good Times?
Oh, boy. I believe it was a story that featured one of the minor characters. I think it featured the character who was the building superintendent, who I liked this character. Like I told you, I've always been a character guy. I liked this character, and because he was more of a minor character, he didn't get much airtime. And I wrote the script was sort of about him, and I just explored him a little bit, and apparently they liked it.
Did that script get produced?
No, it didn't get produced for air. Later on, once I was on staff, I did a similar script that revolved around that character that did get produced, yeah.
What do you think Norman Lear saw in you that made him want to hire you?
Boy, I don't know, because I've always enjoyed making people laugh. Growing up in what New Hallville eventually became, the ability for me, because I wasn't as tall or as muscular as LeBron James, the ability to make people laugh was very important for my survival. But I enjoyed that, and I would hope that Norman saw in the script, in addition to like the little political elements, that, you know, there was good humor in the situation as opposed to making light of a person, a group of people. There's that just the situation itself, while it wasn't as wild as, you know, an Addams Family episode. And I know Norman was very much into like, reality, could see in this situation, yeah, that could happen. But yet it was very funny, but that could happen. So at least that's what I hope. So.
At what point in the life of Good Times did you start working on it?
Very late. It was John Amos had left. So it was the year that Esther, you know, the character Florida, was raising the kids on her own. I think there might have been a year to go. I think there might have, about the middle of the season before the last season. I do recall the cast wasn't happy. I mean, it wasn't, and I could sense that immediately when I walked in, you know, that it wasn't a lot of joy in Mudville here. And later on, I had found out that there was kind of a disconnect. A lot of the older members of the cast, you know, wanted the show to make a statement, you know, a social statement, whereas the younger ones wanted the show to be funny. Apparently for a while it seemed like the adults were winning and there were a lot of, quote, issue shows. You know, I sort of came along and I was the guy, knowing nothing about this, by the way, you know, and I was the guy that said, okay, now let's do some, let's laugh, let's have a good time. So I was immediately, you know, sort of brought into the younger camp, and you know, things from there went all right. I suppose it was unfortunate that there was always this sense of unease because, you know, people wanted sort of different things going on with the show. But I always thought that, you know, humor first. You know, I was always a humor first guy, even though I knew I was on, you know, a Norman Lear type of show, and Norman liked to deal with issues and all of that back then, little morality plays. And I knew, you know, for me to stay there, you know, I would have to do that. But, you know, any way I could, you know, I would try to, you know, inject some form of humor in the show.
For people who haven't seen it, can you just describe the premise of the show?
Good Times was a show about the Evans family who lived in Chicago. I believe that the projects that they lived in was a project modeled after Cabrini Green projects, which is very, very rough project in Chicago. I'd never been there. You know, them just trying to make the best of it, you know, them trying to make the best of their lives and live through those circumstances. Everyone, I guess, remembers J.J. Dynamite, you know, remember that. You know, the working at the chicken place with the bobblehead chicken on his. So, you know, ask your parents.
So you were hired as a staff writer.
Yes.
And did your role change at all on the course of the show?
Not really. I did wind up, the first year I got there, I might have written, and there weren't many left, 2 or 3 episodes. The year that I came back, their final year, I wrote 7 or 8 of the 24 or 26 episodes that they did. So yeah, I was the workhorse. I enjoyed it because, like I said, all of my humor, really came through characterization. That's what I liked. And that second year, I began to learn more about story structure as it related to television. Having to accomplish this, and this all in a period of 24 minutes and do it consistently. So, it was a little bit like factory work, but that was the year that I probably learned the most.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about working with the producers, Irma and Austin Kalish?
Yes, Irma, Austin in particular, he was, I remember him, he spoke very cryptically. I'm not sure that he was used to speaking with such a rank beginner, because I think with him there was just things I was supposed to know, and it would have been like I'm working, I just blew into town and I'm working with a master chef who would just hand me just a pot of ingredients and then go. So they come back, and whereas Irma, at the time, understood a little, and we were able to, she explained things. She was kind of Austin's interpreter for me.
Did you have a lot of contact with Norman Lear?
Not much. Occasionally he would call me up and see how I'm doing, but at that time, apparently, why wouldn't he be? But he was very busy, riding herd over the empire at that time, and so I didn't get to see him a lot, but the times that I did, he was always extraordinarily nice to me. It wasn't one of those where it wasn't one of these Milton, Michael. Well, Michael, yeah, it wasn't that at all. I mean, he knew who I was. He would ask me how I was doing, and he would always, "Are you saving your money?" And I'm thinking, "Oh, I'm going to be fired," But it was just truly out of concern. It was great.
That's very great.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about the writing process on the show.
On Good Times?
Yeah.
Good Times, the writing process. Everyone sort of had their own little office. The writing teams, there were a lot of writing teams on Good Times, as I recall. At least I thought there were quite a few. And everyone would meet in Irma's office, and when an idea came up, whether it came from the outside through the story editors or just in-house, would meet and talk about it. Now, I, being just the staff writer, I was not privy to those meetings, but they and the executive producers and the story editors would go into the room, and they would talk about ideas that they had, and if one was accepted and they liked it, a story outline was worked out. People would go back into their offices, work out a storyline, and kind of dole it out either to the freelance writer who pitched it, or if it was in-house, to the staff writers like us. And we would do, it was very, very conventional. I'd write up a story outline, give it to the story editors. They would go over it. They would give me notes. I would write it, do it again, give it to the story editors. They would go into the room. They would come back. There would be another set of notes. I do a first draft, go back notes, second draft, go back notes, rewrite, and be done. That was the only time I ever worked that way, and then, I'm told by the vets that that's how it was done. It wasn't quite. It wasn't like the Dick Van Dyke Show, which is how I actually worked. I got used to working later on, but that's very cut and dried, very factory-esque.
What was the makeup of the writing staff? Was it diverse?
When I got there, there was one black woman who was I think she also was the staff writer. She was also involved in the previous year's college theater festival. But the writing staff was all white. And I think that was another reason that the cast, was happy to see me, when I first showed up.
Right. Talk a little bit about being one of the few African Americans writers on a show about African Americans.
Well, when I first, it was really had to hit the ground running. I was prepared when I got there for that, and I kind of knew that to a lot of them, I'm not speaking about the executive producers, but to a lot of the writing staff, that my coming mid-season like that through the American College Theater Festival was actually more of a headache to them. It was, they had to stop, they had to give me an office, and it's not like I'm also white, black, or otherwise, this kid who went to art school in New York City. I came from North Carolina, so they're thinking Kunta Kinte is going to walk in the room, and it's like, we got to stop it. We got to, what are we going to do with this kid? So they talk to me, hi, my name is so-and-so, I worked with Sid Caesar, here's your office, which was clearly it was a filing room, last week. And my job the first week was to read their stuff so that I knew how a television teleplay was supposed to look like. And so they gave me their stuff to read. And for the first week, I literally just sat in there and just read, whatever they wanted me to read. It wasn't that they weren't unfriendly. It was that they were busy, and they did not expect much of me. I don't know about any previous winner of the American College Theater Festival, I don't know, but I imagine that time of year, which was getting very close to the end of the year, a lot of scripts, a lot of things going on. Told you about the turmoil. It was kind of like a championship football team just headed to the playoffs, and then this walk-on scrub comes, who's probably barefoot and has like grass in his teeth, going, hey, I'm the new running back. What do you guys want me to do? It's just here, go to do this. That's really what the first year was about. Once I began to prove myself, things were all right. The cast, I did notice the cast leaned on me a little bit. There was a problem at one time with the script having to do with, this was another one of their issue things, with the concept of welfare and the way it was handled in the script. I barely remember this. The cast was upset and the writers didn't know why. And I said, well, you got to understand that to a lot of people, to a lot of blacks, having to go on welfare is humiliating and extremely degrading, and it's nothing that you're just going to just pass over and just go, oh, well, we'll just do this for a while, and then, when we get a job, it's much bigger issue. So, yeah, I think that there's some frustration there because it seems like they're almost ready to party, Yeah, government check. It's really not like that. There's a lot of places not like that. So for a while, I played that role too. I remember, just sitting there. This is just, I don't know why this story just popped into my head. I hadn't thought about it in years. I'm just sitting there working one day, and there's a little knock on the door, and come in, and one of the producers just stuck his head in there. That's what makes it funny. It was just his head, and he said, "Hey, Mike, do black girls play with Barbie dolls?" And, yeah, thanks. And they just closed the door. Never heard another word about that. That's how it was. Yeah.
So how do you keep it funny when you're writing a show about a socioeconomically depressed area?
Well, it's really not that difficult because there is a lot of fun in, socioeconomically depressed areas. I mean, you do try to make the best of it. You just don't dwell on what makes the area socioeconomically depressed. You have parties. You play with Barbie dolls. You do what anyone else anywhere else would do with what you have. Some of it may even be just pure escapism. We're going to have fun because if we don't have fun, all right, we're here not having fun. That's even worse. So, we have no choice but to have fun. But, the fun has to come from a certain direction. You can't make fun of everything, and I think that was part of the disconnect that the writing staff, the producing staff, and the actors had at that time. Where the humor was going to come from. A lot of them didn't like it because they felt like the humor was silly, and it was silly. I don't have a problem with silly, because I'm thinking about the audience too. I'm thinking about people like my father, who would work all day and then come home, and the last thing he wants to turn on a sitcom and hear the words like, "Jimmy got shot." It's like, well, you know what? I can go right back to work and watch Jimmy get shot. Make me laugh. And that was my priority with him. It always has been, to just make people laugh. Even if it's escapism, if it's silly, if it's goofy, fine. Got no problem with it. There's enough venues, if you want to sit and cry and feel sorry and hopeless. It's called the news.
Right. You mentioned Jimmy Walker and the dynamite thing. Was there rules for usage of dynamite? How did that work?
I think that they tried to limit the dynamites to one, an episode. But by the time I got there, you had to have one. I guess on different strokes, they had to be of what you talking about, Willis. I don't know what the rule book was, about what particular scene, but I think there was one dynamite per show, I believe.
And what did you learn from this show that you took on to your next shows?
Other than, say, technically, formatting, I learned that, I was really going to try to make a concerted effort to do as few issue-oriented shows as I could. I did not see, and I had to keep this to myself a lot because I knew where I was. I didn't see so much the value in that. Now I know when it started with All in the Family, I could understand it a little bit better, but we were, 7, 8, 9 years, north of All in the Family. By that time, we were doing the same things over and over again. Things had started to seem, gotten really, really trite and uncomfortable, because it dawned on me, and again, you think a lot of things when you're stuck in traffic on the and I'm thinking, well, are people really learning anything? I mean, is this really helping? Or is this just in a strange kind of way? Are we kind of making fun of these issues by giving them such short shrift like that? I mean, it's not that anything that we're doing maliciously. Is we get 24 minutes to make someone aware that they shouldn't run from someone because they have AIDS. I don't, can we make this funny? I mean, can we say that? And I think from there, I really got it in me that, I was going to do what I could, to just try to rein some of this stuff in and, push the funny, a little bit more. Like I said, what I did learn, story structure. I learned deadlines. I learned that everybody wasn't nice, but everybody wasn't nuts either. I made some friends. I made some friends. I wasn't sure that was going to happen when the first day, I set foot in this town, because I said, this is really different. And a lot of the things that people were into and were entertained by, so I came out of there, I think, a little bit better than I went in.
What do you think is the legacy of Good Times?
Oh, I think, by showing an audience, again, with the three networks back then, obviously, a great deal of the country, it wasn't like they would run into black folk every day, and I think, the legacy is, okay, we're inviting you, Mr. and Mrs. family that lives in Springfield, Illinois, in the suburbs. We're, inviting you into our home, and you can come in. You have no fear of being involved in a drive-by. You're safe, but yet you can come in and you can see that, not all of us are, out to rob you. Not all of us are out to kill you. And we like to have fun just like you do. At least I hope that they got more out of that than a lot of the issue stuff. That's what I'd like to think. And that's what saddens me a little bit about television today. I don't want to jump around like this. I know we have an order, but, because it's polarized now, we're human beings, so we're only going to gravitate to what we know. So, now we're sort of back to, all right, this is a women's show, so women will watch it, and this is a kid show, so kids will watch it, and this is a black show, so blacks will watch it, and so that's all gone now. So now we're back to, who's our neighbor? I don't know. We didn't have that then. That's kind of sad that we've taken that step backwards. I'm sorry. You can edit that and put it further.
That's great. So after Good Times, you moved on to the Jeffersons. So how did that come about?
Yes. I'm not sure how it came about. It was really just sort of an assignment. Next thing I knew, I was on the Jeffersons, and I guess the producers at the time, Mike Milligan, Jay Moriarty, were friends with the story editors that were on Good Times, Kim Weiskopf and Michael Baser. Kim and Mike, who I got along with fabulously, by the way, and I found out much later that they were actually, let's just say they were actually, trying to find the good word, conscripted to read the finalists of the awards and help make decisions. And I guess they actually were very instrumental in my script Tilt winning. I guess what had happened was that Mike and Jay asked Kim and Mike, when Good Times was over, is there anyone that you guys liked that we could use? And I think that's how that happened. But yes, I wound up on the Jeffersons the next year. And
you were hired as a writer?
Yes.
Did your role change over the years?
Very much. I was on the Jeffersons for 5 years, and I came in as a writer. I progressed to story editor very quickly, and then went up the ranks. And by the time it was done, I was the EP, the executive producer. But yeah, I did that for 5 years.
And what was the writing process for the Jeffersons?
In the very beginning, it was very similar to Good Times because that's actually the way it was. I mean, that's just the way it was. I don't know every show, but that seemed to be the way people just did things, and that was the way I was used to it. As things progressed, that changed because I liked all the writers working together, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I will get there, but it was very similar to Good Times for, I'd say, about the first year and a half. The slight difference was that once I became story editor, I was more involved in those meetings, with those closed door meetings about story development, and to see how that worked. I also, again being story editor, began meeting with freelance writers and helping, if an idea came along, helping to develop that into a story. I think that if I could go back and I had any control over this whatsoever, I probably would have said, I think I was bumped up a year too soon. Because I'm not sure. I think 2 or 3 or 4 or 20 stories that would have made good stories got by me because I didn't know really how to take them, work the way I learned later on. And I think that came along too quickly, but I did my best.
Were there rules for writing Jefferson's characters?
The same rules that applied to every other show. You had to know them, and which is, that sounds like so obvious, but you would be surprised at the people who didn't. There really weren't rules. Now the Jeffersons, but when I got on, that was a very issue-oriented show too. They were a little bit more willing to go with the funny because Sherman, how you going to hold this back, the relationship with him and Florence the maid and all of that. So they were, but they were still very heavily issue-oriented. I did enjoy the humor, but, along with that, and I should have known, would come the criticism and the problems from people wanting to know, well, why can't we be more issue-oriented? Why can't we make more of a social statement? So whenever they would get hit with questions like that, it would almost be, find the black guy here, talk to him, and I would wind up, speaking to, journalists and writers about things like that. And sooner or later I'd say something obnoxious and get everybody in trouble. But I really believe that, it's not my place to educate you, to make you more socially aware. So don't you understand, if you go to the Jeffersons to learn these kind of things, that doesn't say a lot of good about you. Don't you see that I'm trying in a strange kind of way, I'm trying to help you. You have other places to go to learn about, the social ills of the country. You got to come to me. That's doesn't say much bad. Doesn't say anything bad about me. So, I was that guy. So I would wind up in the after meeting, with producers rubbing their heads, going, "You said what? That's Jet Magazine. You just insulted." What do you think? What am I gonna do? So that was the beginning of a lot of face palming, a lot of problems for them about me. But
did you have to deal with a lot of network notes?
At that time, no, because I was just a story editor. I had to. A lot of what I had to do was as a result of network notes. By the time I got on, the Jeffersons was a 5-year-old show, so they pretty much knew what they were getting. They weren't bothering the execs quite as much. Now, what had happened, and this was just happenstance, luck. The year that I joined the Jeffersons was the year that they moved them from, I believe, Wednesday night to, you remember that great CBS comedy lineup that they had for years? It was the Jeffersons and I think Alice and like a bunch of other One Day at a Time. I mean, they just had, CBS had a comedy lineup that was just monstrous as far as, rate for a long time, and the Jeffersons was kind of a linchpin. That happened the year that that I joined. So the ratings went way up, and that helped keep the network at bay. I don't know if Wednesdays when they weren't doing so well, if they were all over them the year before I got there to help. I do know that sooner or later, the characters had a baby, and that usually means that's almost always a network thing because that's how they fix everything, then. But it wasn't really affecting me because there was a couple of barriers between the network and me.
You also on the Jeffersons met your future partner, Ron Levitt. Did you guys hit it off right away?
Well, Ron and Dave came over. Dave Duclon was his partner at the time from Paramount. They had just done, I believe, Laverne and Shirley. When Mike and Jay went off for something else, and I can't remember what they went off. They brought in Ron and Dave to assume producership. They were eventually going. That's right. Mike and Jay were still there. They brought in Ron and Dave as producers because Mike and Jay were going to leave for like development or something else, do their own stuff, and they were being groomed to take their place. At this time, I had moved from story editor to I think executive story editor. But yes, that's how I met them, and yes, we hit it off because they were very like-minded. Actually, about the only like-minded team that I had run into, in that we both really, really hated issue-oriented shows. They did. They came from, the Paramount School of Comedy, Laverne and Shirley, Happy Days. They didn't really do much of that stuff, and they liked the funny too, and so I knew we would hit it off because of that.
And when and why did you leave the Jeffersons?
I left the Jeffersons after 5 years to do other projects. It had, by the time I left, I had been there for probably about 100 of the episodes. I was being sucked dry, basically. I didn't have much more to give, the show, and wanted to do, other things.
Did you have a favorite episode?
Of the Jeffersons?
Yeah.
Boy. This is where I'm trying to edit out anything that I wrote, because I know what you guys would think if I did that. Yes, there was, and this was really just a one joke thing, but I've already gone on record as saying, I like occasionally stupid things. There was a show where George Jefferson had won the award for the Small Businessman of the Year, which took an already inflated ego to just, uncharted waters, and just to watch him strut around and rub that in everybody's face. First of all, it was a tour de force for Sherman. You can't help but love to see, just a very, very happy, George Jefferson. Something fine. And like I said, it was a one joke show, because the last scene, he found out the Small Businessman was an award given to businessmen who were like 5'4" and under. And that was one of the longer, when he found that out, when we did that scene, that was one of the longer actual laughs that I can recall on the Jeffersons or any other shows. During our tenure, Ron, Dave, my tenure there, we really, really tried our best to go totally away from issue-oriented stuff. We even had George drop his signature honky. They would always call Tom Willis honky, because again, I'm thinking, well, if we're just looking at this chronologically, he's probably called Tom Willis a honky about 250 times. I said, isn't it time for Tom to just haul off and smash his little ass, into the floor by now? Because I don't know if I could take being called that many times. And after a while, this isn't like Dynamite, After a while, you just go, well, okay, all right, enough. And so we got away from a lot of the racial stuff. And they were going to snipe at each other. And if you'll recall, we gradually had George start insulting him because of his weight, rather than because of his race. Because we figured, all right, you really wanted to do something, you could do something about your weight. So, all right. So, but by the time that was over, and I'm sure a lot of the early Jefferson fans did not like this, because they were different. There wasn't a lot of the racial stuff. There wasn't a lot of the issue-oriented stuff. We did special episodes, but they were more personal than racial. We did a show about Isabel Wheezy, going back to the house she grew up in, because they were going to tear it down, and just reminiscing by walking just through the rooms, what happened in that room and what happened in that room. So if I'm going to do a special episode, that's what I want to do. I don't want to do set a laugh track to The Color Purple. I want to do personalized stories that anybody can relate to. And I remember years later, and it might have had to do with you guys, the Jeffersons were inducted into the Television, Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame. and I was on the dais, and I remember it was a packed house out there. You know, all the actors came. It was a packed house out there. But this audience almost looked like it was cast, because I think if you took a sample, it was like 33.33%, black, 33.33% white, 33.33% Hispanic, 50% men, 50% women, 50% people over 40, and it almost like, well, this is a statistical. This is fiction, but that's in my mind what a television audience is supposed to look like.
Right. I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
I'm going to change tape.